Good viewer, you are watching Xirtus.
Latterwave. I just can't help myself. It's good to see you guys. I was just having a talk with Chaz and Dave behind the screen here before David arrived. David, by the way, good to introduce Dave and Dave. David, this is great. It's a good thing. And of course, the illustrious latter day Chad. Good to have you in the house. So, David, you've been spending all week with your rabbi assorting Torah and Talmud and different the Zohar, figuring out how they go from right to left instead of left to right, basically. And Dave has been spending a lot of time reading the scriptures and digging deep and also doing some sci-fi. I mean, we just were talking about how the crabification seems to be happening. If Jordan Peterson had latched on to crabs and lobsters, the world might have been a more spiritually aligned place. But then Dave was mentioning that so much going on. Is that Chad? Chad, you're loud. That's all right. Dave was mentioning how he was working on a science fiction book. I think he put it out a couple years ago where the aliens were crabs. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Three-sided crabs. Yeah. It's called Abbott in Darkness, and it's a sort of a space analog for the East India Company, and it's about gun running and trying to be a decent person in a thoroughly corrupted world.
Three-sided crabs. What does it mean to be a three-sided crab?
It means they're radially symmetric. So they have 6 claws, and they move by spinning.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, all right. So I feel like you're already on this wave. That's pretty sweet. And we wanted to talk a bunch about scripture in general. I know that Chad, you've been wanting to talk about Deuteronomy. I was really interested in bringing up like the Sepher Yetsirah a bit because I know you brought it up last time, and it's interesting to look at like different perspectives of the Holy Spirit and the idea of like the innumerable name of God having to do with God's family. But I'm open-minded. I don't know. Like we could start anywhere, really.
One thing. What was that thing you were putting in the chat earlier about the endowment symbols having some sort of Hebrew meaning?
Can we do that? Is that chill? Like that's a wild opener to do. But okay,
dude, let's just start out with that right off the bat.
All right, hypothesis here. Okay, and I'm only doing this because I've seen other podcasts go on Wikipedia and show this. So just so you know, like in terms of historical stuff, if you were to go to Wikipedia on temple garments, people give also the preface for this. People like to laugh at magic underwear. They think this whole thing is like weird.
Right? Yeah, there's a Jewish version of it, right?
We've talked about this idea that there's temple garments. There's, David Charles Plate, what I'm talking about, like that the different priesthoods have specific clothes that they're supposed to wear for specific purposes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't have that much knowledge on that, but I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's a Jewish practice. I believe it's called talit, if you want to pull that up, it's in certain Orthodox Jewish circles, they have similar undergarments called the talit. And it's sort of, yeah, there's an upper one and then there's an under one. So
right, and there's some certain patterns that you start to see emerge in this thing. But what we were talking about was like this idea of like there's secret patterns. People call these secret patterns as opposed to hidden mysteries, right? But these are these hidden mysterious patterns, but people wonder about them a lot. And if you just go and look at the, you know, the letters hey, right, and you look at the letters yod, and you look at the letters vav, right, then you start to get this idea from the because at some point the Tetragrammaton, we didn't use the symbols that we're using today, right? Like if you start to look at like ancient Hebrew versus modern Hebrew Hebrew's changed a lot, like the way symbolism works, and it's based a lot of the revival was based on like Arabic, and Arabic had a lot of Phoenician symbolism. So when we start to see like the original versions of these letters that are in the Tetragrammaton, we see like Yod, He, Vav from these perspectives as being like the V, from being this sort of like the thread or the nail, right? The sort of idea of the nail. And then also Yod kind of as you can see Yod here, right? So it's really interesting because when people talk about hidden and why things are hidden, well, this is the name of God. This is something that the priests are supposed to keep really sacred and close to their heart, but they're not supposed to just be like, I mean, today, a lot of Jews won't say the name of God. They still say Hashem. We've had Jews on our podcast that don't want to use the holy name, right? Because they think it's sacred. So I think it's interesting because it kind of makes a lot of sense, right? There's a correlation here directly with the name of God or whatever we're thinking that means in terms of the name of the Tetragrammaton.
Right. There's also the idea that it's not pronounceable, or to pronounce it would be to unify with it, and there's a transcendence in that. So, you know, it's there's a question of if it's even possible, which is what makes it kind of funny when you say Hashem or you know, or El, or you're abbreviating it in different ways when really like the name itself is something that to pronounce it is such a profound thing that it would be like dissolution, you know. The name itself, what the name really is, because even people relate that the like what we call Tetragrammaton is still just like ultimately a stand-in for whatever that name ultimately is. Does that make sense?
Dave, you got thoughts?
Man, I don't know. Yeah. So, it's interesting to me that the root that appears to be the root of the name Asherah has a couple of meanings, and one has to do with happiness and one has to do with straight. It generates the adjective yashar. And so it's interesting to me that those markings, I mean, they look to me like they could mark maternal contacts. Okay. Birth, knee, breasts. I'm going to say the word breasts a lot today, actually. Today is the Dave Butler Talks About Breasts Day. That's what I've been doing research on. I'm going to say breasts so many times today. Andreas, you're going to get uncomfortable. So, and so like that, and those could be a square and compass, right? And the idea of making straight, right? Make straight the path of the way of the Lord. But I'm a big believer in the insight bestowing power of and, as opposed to no X, right? So I think maybe many of these things could be true.
It's interesting to connect it to the feminine again because of the Yetsirah, because the idea of the three divine feminine mothers, right? There's like Aleph, Shin, and Mem. So this idea of like the fire, the elemental fire associated with the mind, right?
Right. They all counteract with each other because the Shin is fire, the Mem is water, and the Aleph is air. And so the air feeds the fire and the water puts out the fire. And so they have this relationship.
That's interesting. Yeah, to connect to the feminine, because when they say like the name of God, is it really just talking about, you know, we can say it, right, Yahweh, or are we talking about the family of God? And is that including like the entire archetype of what makes the universe?
Right. Well, if we're talking Sepher Yetsirah, then you're saying that from Keter to Chochmah, that's the Yud, that's the flame. That's like the Hebrew alphabet is referred to as a flame alphabet because that Yud is in every letter, right? So speaking in flame in a sense, and then Bina is like the upper Shekinah, and that's the first Hey of Tetragrammaton, and then Vav corresponds to the 6 lower Sephirot before Malkut, and that relates to Ze'er on Ping, which is the masculine counterpart to Shekinah, and then the lower Shekinah, the daughter, that's the final Hey, that's Malkut, and so that's related to as a family because it's generation. So like the Sepher Yetsirah is kind of articulating the way that things come into form. I mean, that's what Yetzirah means. You're talking about how things come into form, how they're created. And so it's acknowledging that these principal dynamics are in all organic life. And so that becomes the question then, because you're looking at a primordial order that we can recognize that exists in nature, but then in our goings on, we replicate that, and that replication only really gets so close to, you know, the depth and profundity of what actually exists in nature. So that's like, you could relate that to the Tower of Babel, you could relate that to the first and second and third temple, is this idea that by the nature of us constructing something and mimicking that pattern, it's never going to be the full level of what already exists in creation. And so and ultimately it's not separate, but it is distinct, you know. And that's like there's this idea that you'll see evidence of even in humanity's going on, despite our hubris and despite everything. It's like the hand of God is still in it, because we're not separate, but that distinction is important. Yeah.
So you just for the benefit of everyone, including me, who knows less than you on the subject. So actually, Andreas, you want to put like the Sephirotic tree back up. So when you're talking about those lines, so each of the sort of straight lines, these are the 10 Sephirot, right? Emanations. And for each of the straight lines is assigned one of the alphabets, one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So there are 22 straight lines. And now I had thought that Aleph, Mem, Shin were the 3 vertical lines, but that I'm seeing now that's not right.
It depends. Actually, these attributions that we're looking at in this diagram, we actually relate to like the Golden Dawn and the OTO in their system. But the thing is that no, it's fine actually, because the thing is that I found evidence pretty directly that that you'll see in ancient Kabbalistic text communications around those 22 pathways that do actually reflect what was what like Eliphas Levi would relate to in later years, as far back as late 15th, early 16th century. And those attributions may exist before then, but that's as far back as I've gone that I've seen those indicated. And so I don't know how controversial that is necessarily, like, because European occultists would tend to take certain liberties as they're relating to it that are removed from the traditional. But at the same time, even if you look at the Ari, like, he did the same thing, and he was very influenced by Aristotle. And so you see these certain like dualities projected onto the polarity of the tree that didn't exist prior to that. So even if one was to say, oh, well, the European occultists aren't really doing the traditional thing, well, it's like, even at this point, what we call traditional isn't as traditional as it could be. So, and then there's also the issue of people taking the later attributions as authority. So not even just like how the letters apply, but just there's so many examples of that where adjustments are made over time, and then those are taken as the authority, but it depends on who you talk to. For me, I like to go as far back as possible because I feel like there's something like in the initial insights that was impressed into us that we're further and further removed from. Like, I think that that's something that just comes with the fall, so to speak. So,
Yeah, I share your instinct on that. Okay, so I'm not wrong, because my memory is that the Aleph Mem Shin are the three mothers, and either they're the three horizontal or the three vertical lines, but that's not what that diagram had. But you're telling me I'm not crazy. Maybe that's correct.
No, I should have taken Kaplan's Sepher Yetsirah before we started this, just so I
Yeah,
could
my copy's at
cross reference. Yeah, I have it in the other room. I could go grab it. But yeah, no, it's just he has actually two sets of attributions in that book from the best of my memory, but neither of those attributions are what we actually see utilized by the Golden Dawn, which if you go online and you're looking up those attributions, you'll generally see the Euro occultist version.
Yeah.
Right. So do you have a reason you think why it does that? Why it would break the three mothers in the European occult?
Well, we relate to the three pillars as corresponding to the three mother letters in the first place. So we're looking at how those letters are being associated with the 22 pathways, but the three columns themselves correspond to those mother letters, They're kind of serving double time or triple time or whatever, It's just how you want to relate to it.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like this relates to the breast thing, but like this idea, like the idea of femininity being suppressed, the femininity of God, the femininity of the Kohanat, like the priestesshood, that's come up a lot in our like research of the Deuteronomist reforms. So I wonder, what do you think about? Do you think that there's a connection there? Because they say Yetzirah is from Abraham, yet it seems like it's from Southern Europe, probably post Christianity, even. What do you think about all that?
Who, me?
Anybody.
Which Dave or
Yeah.
Chad?
I'm just gonna. I love that you both have the name Dave, so that you guys have to like both try it.
Well, I mean, as far as like the Zohar goes, it's argued that we know it's at least as old as the 12th century because that's the first record of it, but it could be argued that it's as early as the 2nd century. So that's a pretty extreme gulf of time, but we know it's at least that early. It could be much earlier. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's anyone's guess. I mean, I'm talking about the Zohar. I don't know about the Sepher Yetsirah in terms of the ultimate timeline of it, though I know that it's not far. It's supposed to not be far removed. It's record from the Zohar. It's one of the staple Kabbalistic texts, along with the Bahir and. Yeah.
My memory is that the Zohar, the Sepher Yetsirah is the earliest of the three.
That's what they say, but we don't know that. Yeah.
Oh, okay, fair enough. The Bahir quotes the Sepher Yetsirah that does not seem to go the other way.
Right.
So, all right, fair enough. We don't know that. So I think Kaplan suggested that it may be as old as kind of the earliest rabbinical literature and maybe preserve. I mean, this is the kicker, right? May preserve older ideas.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, the argument that that if what it's pointing to is valid, like if it is true for all intents and purposes, then you would expect to find that from all cultures around the world, and no one would really own that culturally in a sense, because if it's true, it's true. Like and that shouldn't be a threatening thing for religious people. Like if you're a religious Jew and someone's arguing that this is something that was recognized in ancient Egypt or even, God forbid, say China or something, it shouldn't matter, because that actually speaks to its authenticity more than if it were otherwise, right?
I love you're saying that, and I totally share that view, with the caveat that it depends what you mean by a religious person, right? If you're defending an institution, right, you might feel threatened because you feel like the value of the institution is its exclusive claims.
Right. So well, it's also how other people worked with that, but it's also just working with what is the makeup of, like, because when we're looking at the Kabbalistic tree, we're supposed to be seeing a pattern that exists in lightning, in plant life, and in humans and all animals, all organic life. And so, how is that a cultural thing? Like, if the culture may align with that, may have insight into that, may adapt to that, or relate to their systems in such a way that they're trying to replicate that as closely as possible. But that doesn't mean that they own what's being pointed to ultimately. Just what it is that they're doing in their personal lives. That's another matter.
Sure. And as you said earlier, if it's true, it shouldn't be threatening that you find it somewhere else. It should feel like confirmation. You should say,
right.
oh,
It's like the Epic of Gilgamesh or something. It's like if you were like, oh no, but the deluge is in the Torah, so it can't, can't be in the Sumerian, but it's like,
I think that's
no,
even
that
more
actually,
intense when you think about the Kabbalah, because a lot of the Kabbalah has to do with like sounds, like these names, these words, these are made through specific movements that we perform, right? And so to actually utter the name of God, or to be using the Enochian language, might have effects on your body the same way people think of like yoga. And so the more you look at that, the more there are people doing, like, that's a good example actually, people doing yoga. People who've done yoga and have died for yoga probably think that people in California just doing yoga for fun in their bodies is weird. I think a little bit, maybe.
You mean asana when you're saying yoga? You're talking specifically about physical exercises, practices.
Yeah, they're doing the full. They're not doing the whole. They're not doing the whole sadhana. Yeah, but it could be. Yeah. It could be also that they're getting a lot out of it, right? So if people from around the world were, I feel like you would be shocked to find, if you had kept something secret, like this is something that's in your temple and it's kept secret, and all of a sudden people around the world are just doing it openly somewhere else, that would probably be shocking, right? Because you felt like people had to die for that to be kept.
Right.
So I have a question. Are you saying that this is pointing to some sort of primordial religion of Adam that all other religions came from?
Well, that's the older. So you guys are talking about like the older Kabbalah, right? So like isn't the Adam Harishon, right? The angel Raziel, right? Mm-hmm. That's like supposed to be the oldest one. So it does kind of beckon to this idea of a primordial religion, right?
I transcribed some text at one point with my rabbi that was like kind of the basis of the Adam Kadmon. I forget what it's called. I'd have to ask him, but we were reading the introduction, which is, very old. I don't remember exactly how old, but it's quite old. And it's in this text, it's where we get the strands of the beard and all these, it's got all these numerical symbolic things going on. But there was like, it kind of reminded me of like Monty Python, where you got the holy hand grenade and it's telling you like, count ye unto 3, count ye not unto 4. And it just keeps repeating the same thing over and over and over again in different ways. But what it was repeating was this kind of emphasis on what it is an allegory, and kind of like almost like a warning not to take this in any literal way. And so I find it interesting then that, like, following that, you see people sometimes relating to God in the same sense. It's like this old man with a beard kind of idea. And it's like, dude, this is like, it's like they skipped that part. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, there was like, must have been, for one page in the Hebrew would be probably 20 pages in English if you're to try and write that out. And so it's like, how many times are they going to warn you against like not jumping the gun and taking this in a literal way?
I mean, this looks like this is this meant to be Adam Kadmon? Because I think this is the Sephirotic tree imposed over, right? Isn't that what we're seeing here?
That's exactly what it is. This is a little misleading here. There's an issue with the translation in regards to feet. There's cases where you'll see in the Bible where they refer, in the Old Testament, where it's people are washing somebody's feet, but it's in all likelihood relating to that they were washing their genitalia. And so like, so it's kind of funny because, like, they say that Malkut relates to the tip of the genitals. In a woman, that would be like the clitoris, and in the man, it's like the urethra, right? And then the shaft would be yesod. And so sometimes it gets confusing for people because they're like, oh, well, yesod is the phallus. And it's like, and then so they think Malkut would then be the feet, but not necessarily. Although you could argue that it's the feet, but really that would be more like Netzach and Hod. Because
we actually brought this up before, because we talked about Ruth, and we talked about several places in the Bible where she sleeps at the feet, and this comes up several times. Dave, don't make me pull open my Catholic art pictures of the lactating Virgin Mother Mary, because I know. I know that we're not the first ones to be this racy. Okay, I'm just saying we can.
No, I just look. I'm fine. I just Just want everyone to have trigger warnings so they feel comfortable.
Is that
Gosh,
there's the
fair.
Greek myth around like the basis of why we call the Milky Way, and then that's related with like breast milk. There's like what goddess is that? How does that? I'm not as familiar.
I don't know that one. I'll have to
You
look
may
that
have
up
to
for
look
you.
My memory is that it's Hera, and for some reason, like a
Yeah.
baby was torn from her
You're-
breast. But I forget who it is.
I think you're right. That
Hathor-
sounds about right.
Hathor, and then apparently a bunch of people. Nuwa is also associated with it. Tanabata and Hathor makes a lot of sense because the cow, so the Egyptian, goddess with the Milky Way.
Malacco plus.
Oh no!
Well, this is David's point, right? That these things can be shared across cultures, and there's a kind of ecumenism in there. You don't have to take it as a threat. You can take it as an opportunity to explore and share.
Yeah.
Right. I think that there's an ego thing that exists where we relate to things in terms of ownership, and I don't think ancient people felt that way so much. In fact, I think that's a relatively recent phenomenon. So, like one of my pet peeves is when people treat it that the Romans were copying the Greeks, because I don't think it's a matter of that. I feel that this is something that extended from this, and you can go back through all these different mythologies and find that it's like people are just building off of what was, because it's actually integrated into the next thing,
Yeah. My experience reading the Sepher Yetsirah, I'm envious that you have a mentor, because my experience reading it was like, okay, this book is not actually meant to be read. It's meant to be performed. Kaplan's commentary, where he talks about, if you go through all the permutations, it will take you 30,000 hours or whatever. Like, okay, yeah. I'm late for that. That's not going to happen.
Right.
So I felt like I was seeing a manual for something intensely practical and a thing you were supposed to do. And I was trying to understand it cerebrally, and so I don't know, like I was looking through a terrarium a little bit, right? Like this was not what you're supposed to do with the book.
Well, with the Zohar, there's no illustrations. There's no like representation in the thing itself. That's not until the Middle Ages that we actually like drew the tree of life, and it's extremely misleading when you're looking at any representation of the tree of life, because the Keter has two right sides. So it's really like twisting like nodes.
It's like a space crab. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the whole thing is no. I mean, I think it's a Sepher Yetsirah where he talks about the 10 dimensions, right? I mean, the Sephirotic correspond to 6 dimensions or 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, and also a moral dimension. So that it's also a representation of 5-dimensional space. So yeah, science fiction is not so far off, Andreas.
Oh, totally.
Well, I don't want to lead necessarily, but I'm not like a fan of I'm not a patron of like the smooth segues. So like if there's also like, Dave, you came here with some thoughts that you wanted to share. You could just like.
I did. So, okay, well, this is just going to be an interesting conversation. We're going to patch.
That's how it goes.
Some different kind of stuff. So I got invited to record like an hour-long segment for a sort of conference that'll play in I think 3 weeks or something. And they said, okay, the theme is covenant. Cool. I cannot color inside the lines, so instead I went down a rabbit hole of looking up divine names, and specifically looking at the name Shaddai, which we have talked about before here, and then running into the Book of Mormon, okay, and the name seeming to appear there in some interesting, some provocative context. Now, so I'll go through this stuff.
Sure.
Andreas, I am envious though of your ability to share stuff. So what I got is a little camera, so I can be like, oh, and over here in Deuteronomy 32, and I'll show you the text. And then
that's sweet.
Here, right?
Is that a Joseph Smith prayer candle? No, I'm just kidding.
Is the Mountain Dew?
Okay,
that's the giant mustache. That's
all of these things are great. I'm for it.
Yeah, here's my desk space. This is not a home. This is my workspace. Big gulp full of Nerf darts, right? This is Imagine me thinking deep thoughts. This is where I am.
Based.
So, all right. So my camera's going to go weird because I'm going to be using it to point at stuff.
Okay.
So, so Shaddai, right? What does it mean? So it's translated in the King James version, and actually, David, I'd be interested to hear your perspective. I mean, on everything, but like you may have a very different perspective on this particular than me. The King James translates the name Shaddai as Almighty, and it's an interesting question. Why? There's a sort of a series of meanings that sort of seem to center around Almighty from various words. Okay, so I'm pulling up my dictionary of classical Hebrew here. Can we see that? Bam.
Is this Strong's? What are you looking at?
Well, actually, looking at the I love this, the Concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. So this is like a project from the aughts where they went through and said, you know what? I forget the number. I think there's 8,000 words in the Bible, something like that. Mm-hmm. But it said, but a whole bunch of words have shown up in like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other ancient contexts. They should probably be in the dictionary too. And so this is a newish ancient Hebrew dictionary. There's a revision that's actually coming out now, which I am sad that I don't have. So
does this has Kabbalistic text in it as well?
That's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that. It might. Okay. It might. I don't know the answer. And there is a multi-volume version. This is the concise desktop one. Okay. So the question is, what does Shaddad mean? And we've had this discussion a bit. So look, what are some of the possible meanings? What does Shaddai mean? King James says it means Almighty. Why? Well, the verb Shaddad means to devastate or destroy. Showed in particular is means destruction because of divine displeasure. These are all in here. I'm not going to show them to you right now. Shadu is an old Akkadian word that means mountain. Shada is a verb to pour out. So there's all these ideas of like rain, the one from the mountain. Shed sometimes apparently is used in context where it's understood to mean sovereign Lord. So like sovereignty, also destructive violence, and all of this kind of feeds into that meaning possible.
So like a volcano deity thing.
Volcano, rain, mountain, retribution, kind of all that stuff.
Kind of violence.
Keep in mind that with Hebrew, oftentimes you'll have words that have their opposite will have the same word. So which can get very confusing. Like we don't have that in English where you have the same word meaning both opposites. You also have examples where the gematria will be the same and you'll look and it'll be the opposite thing.
Right.
So like
literally the 7 double letters, right? Bet, Gimel, Kaf, Pei, Resh, Tav are all they have the equal and opposite meaning, right? They could be like abundance or famine.
So, but hold on, I have to stick up for English a bit. We do sometimes, because cleave means either to stick to or to cut away from, right? Yeah.
Leave it to Cleaver.
Leave it to Cleaver. So, okay, but hold on, I'm not done with the name Shaddai, right? This is we have many interesting things to say here, but I love that we're having discussion as we go. So, another possibility that scholars will sometimes say is that maybe it comes from the word sadeh, which is a field. Right, and so the idea here would be that Judah. Here's the claim: Judah's pantheon originally had lots of gods. They got all eventually kludged into one. One of those old gods was the god of the field. Right, a sadeh is a field, a prairie, a plain, a cultivated place. And so Shaddai is a memory of the old agricultural god that has been absorbed into Yahweh. Okay, that's the suggestion. And this is where it got kind of fun. So we're not to breast yet, but we'll get there. So there is allegedly this poetic form of the word sadeh, which is Sadai, which is spelled Sin Dalet Yod. which is interesting because that means that that without the Masoretic points, it's indistinguishable from Shaddai, actually, which makes me wonder. Well, does that mean that we could read those passages and as references to Shaddai, have they been misread or misunderstood? Right. And there's about 15 of them, and I won't read them all, but let's read 2 of them that are really good. So maybe Andreas, pull this up. Lamentation 4:9. Lamentations 4:9 was is one, and there are a couple other passages. All 15 or 14 are all super interesting. I'm just going to pick 2 that are indicative.
So you're saying that word field there at the end?
Yeah, and in fact, it's not just field; it's the field.
Okay.
So what it literally says is, so it's saying, look, you'd rather be killed with the sword than starve to death. That's what this says, right? So, but Andreas, if you go back down so I can see it, oh, you've taken it away. Oh, okay, all right, that's cool. We'll do this.
No, I'll go back. I wanted both. I don't want to take away everything.
No, it's all good.
Wow. Virgin Mary lactation is in my history. That's like, thanks a lot. No, I'm just kidding.
That is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. So they that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger, right? You'd rather be killed fast. For those who die of hunger, pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of Shaddai. That's what it says. There's no the there. This is
this is a good one too. Nehedar says Song of Songs means breasts, and I'm just going to take that. So that's also in there.
Okay, boom. So this is if you didn't have the Masoretic pointing and you read this, you might very naturally read it. These pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of Shaddai. And you might, and there's a couple of these out of these 15. There's a couple or 3 of these that talk about the fruits of Shaddai. Or the fruits of Shaddai, which maybe we could read as the fruits of Shaddai, right? So if we're trying to figure out what is this divine name, there's this interesting possibility that that one thing we ought to think about is that these passages might have been intended to be understood as reference to Shaddai, or have been understood by someone, even if they weren't intended that way, and that therefore this idea of fruitfulness should be associated with it. Now Isaiah 56 has another one. This one's even better. We're gonna go back to our Adam Kadmon stuff here and our funky Garden of Eden. Isaiah 56. I want to say it's also verse 9. We find basically it's not the fruits anymore, but a very similar passage. And all ye beasts of the field, which is all, again, there's no hay in there. It's all ye beasts of Shaddai. Come to devour, yea, all ye beasts in the forest. Of course, it's only the Masoretic pointing that tells us that it should be Shaddai and not Shaddai. So again, all ye beasts of Shaddai, come to devour, yea, all ye beasts in the forest. And again, there are several of these 15 verses where Shaddai, which refer to beasts of Shaddai, sometimes of specific kinds, behemoth Shaddai or parot Shaddai. But this is Hayot Shaddai. Hayot is living things, right? So does Shaddai? Some people surely would have read this, and possibly the writer of this is Trito Isaiah, allegedly, right? May even have intended this to say that Shaddai rules over Hayot.
Well, you know that when you're saying if you're determining whether it's a shin or a sin, you can tell by the dot, and if it appears over the left pillar, so to speak, the left vav or the right vav. So if it's on the left, then it's a sin. If it's on the right, then it's shin.
Understood. But without the pointing, we don't know.
Right.
Without the pointing, it's just like I know how to read it right now in the Bible as it's pointed. But my point is, without the pointing, which is dated 500 to 1000 BCE, right? So well after Lamentations and Isaiah reach the form.
So who are the beasts of the field and who are the beasts of the forest then?
Okay,
right?
so this is interesting, right? Because of the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. So when because Eve gets named twice. She's initially named Isha because she comes out of Ish, right? And of course, wordplay is everything, right? You kind of can't read this stuff in English. So she gets named again when they're expelled from the garden. So I want to say chapter 3, around verse 20, 22, something like that. Genesis chapter 3. And Adam says, I will name her Hava, for she is the mother of every high.
Of life. Yeah.
Which is a living being. She is the mother of Kol High, of every living thing, right? It doesn't say, by the way, every living human, interestingly. It just says of Kol High, every living thing. So there's this interesting connection, right? That Eve is the mother of every high, and Shaddai seems to rule over, to command all of the Hayot. All of the beasts is what.
Do you know the Metatron connection here? Because Metatron has the same gematria as Shaddai.
Oh, super interesting. Okay,
and so which is 314.
Okay.
So the trippy people out there will relate it to pi, but and this is more than I need to get into right now because you're communicating.
No, I don't know. I love it. So we're talking about out of like third Enoch here, yeah.
Right. So there's when Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, his hand is stopped by an angel, and there's a reference. I don't know if it's right in that verse or where it appears, but that it's speaking to that angel. It says that Hashem's name is in it, and so rabbinically, like, people will interpret that the reason why Hashem is in it is because of Shaddai, because it has the same value. So I don't know, but Metat has great significance when you're looking at the Kabbalistic tree as it relates to Da'at. So Metatron essentially is Da'at in a sense, because that between the supernal triad and the 7 terrestrial Sephirot, you have a template that's getting repeated. And so like that template is what is it that comes from Keter to Chokhmah. It gets distributed through Bina into the lower worlds and then repeated in all organic life. And so it gets pretty psychedelic, because Metatron is actually, like in Zohar, is related as like that space that exists as Da'at is related to as a bird's nest, and Metatron is basically that bird. And so there's also that this isn't fixed. So like they relate to like how Metatron exists during this interim of the fall, and how Metatron will exist when Ze'er and Shekhinah are reunited, Teferet and Malkut are reunited. That if you have that the way that transformative shifts take place is they start at the etheric, and we don't see the actual expression of that until it reaches the most dense. So that, like, those pathways that connect those Sephirot, those are dimensions, right? So the vertical dimension is a spiritual dimension, just meaning more etheric, and the horizontal pathways, those are related to the dense physical. And so the way that transformations take place is that the column in the center, you'll have a shift will take place in the vertical, and then you'll see that expressed in a mysterious way in the material. And so, like, in terms of our like perception of it, like we don't actually perceive it initially in terms of the senses, but we do experience it. So if that makes sense. But
yeah.
I mean, on that wave, I just did a quick like on Ya'ar, the word for the forest there, and it's like 280. It was the gematria, and one of the versions of Asherah, like the wife of God, is a 280.
Also a 280.
Yeah, so I was thinking that's kind of similar.
Okay, super interesting. Okay, now I know we convened here under the premise we're going to talk about the Deuteronomists. So I'm going to read a verse out of Deuteronomy now, and I'm going to dedicate it to Chaz. I'm going to discuss this with Chaz because he's been holding out on us over there. And I told the people in the chat that first I would explain what the Deuteronomist were, because to be fair, this is not the kind of thing everybody is talking about at the coffee break room, right? So
Right.
let me give a pithy summary. So first of all, understand they are a hypothesized group of people, okay? They are hypothesized to explain certain features of how the Hebrew Bible is. And in particular, their existence helps to explain why there seem to be sort of three different histories contained in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, okay?
Mhm.
There is one history or one historical record, which is called the Tetragrammaton, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers.
Mhm.
And that seems to have one kind of idea about Israel's relationship with God and one kind of history of Israel. There's a history called the Ezra-Nehemiah complex, which is First and Second Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah. And those books seem to share certain kinds of concerns and vocabulary and a history and be a kind of a different historical record than the Tetragrammaton. And then there is what's called the Deuteronomic history. And this is the book of Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Kings. Okay. And that all seems to go together. And so understand this is hypothesis. Also understand that this is not a fringe hypothesis. Like, this is, the Anchor Bible Dictionary says this is near canonical. That doesn't mean it's true, but like, understand, I'm not saying, I will say many things that you will go, oh, and okay, fine. This is not one of them. This is like,
Right.
man, you walk into a Bible 101 class and secular atheist Bible scholars, this is what they're going to be telling you they think. Okay.
Right.
So, and the basic idea is that there is a movement near the end of the history of the kingdom of Judah. And it seems to be connected with the King Josiah. Maybe they sort of are behind him. Maybe he is their patron. And they share an ideology with him. Okay. And it's different. It's demonstrably different from like the Tetragrammaton or from the Ezra Nehemiah complex. Okay. And in fact, there many scholars have said, boy, it seems like the stuff that what Deuteronomy hates and wants to wipe out is apparently the religion of Abraham. Like, you cannot sacrifice for yourself. You must come into Israel and do it. You know, if someone says they've had a vision from God, kill him. He's a liar. You cannot erect standing stones. It's inappropriate to have visions of the stars, right? But these are all things that are in Genesis. They're all in Genesis. So if you read 2 Kings 23, it seems to be sort of the account of of this movement coming to real political power.
That's the temple. You're talking about the temple.
Well, this is Josiah's reforms, right? So he goes around and he smashes the Asherah, and he eradicated the Kemarim, and he kills the Kodashim, or he breaks down the houses of the Kodashim. He kills the local priests and burns their bones on the altars, right? So it seems like this movement is I think maybe there's a parallel in the Reformation, where there's sort of intellectuals driving it at one level, right? But it becomes also pretty violent. And if you don't do God the way we do God, we're going to kill you. Sort of seems to be 2 Kings 23.
I find it also interesting calling people not from Sodom and Gomorrah sodomites, because now you've got like this first idea of a pejorative. And what is the pejorative? So you're saying here this group doesn't want people to have any in contact with God or God's archons or God's angels or any messengers or anything like that. And they're looking at it essentially like the same as when humans tried to rape angels in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? They're like, we are not to interact with this beyond this veil, right?
Yeah, that is an interesting conversation. In this particular, in 2 Kings 23 in particular, sodomites is an artifact of the translation. What the Hebrew says is the holy ones.
Wow.
Kodeshim, the same word that in Deuteronomy 33 is translated as the saints. And so the logic goes something like this. Hey, who are these masculine holy ones that King Josiah killed? They can't have been good because King Josiah roughed them up and broke their houses down. I bet they were male prostitutes. So William Deaver called it historical slander. There's not any good reason to think that there were male prostitutes in the temple.
So like, yeah, in the original version, then in Hebrew, it's saying like they went in and they killed their holy people. Like,
well, so what?
More
that's
objectively,
who were the Kodeshim, right? Like it sounds like just clinically, you'd say, well, they're holy men or holy people. That's what it means, right? So angels, priests, something in that space. We don't know, right? But
yeah, a lot of conjecture there, and that's something that's really bothered me actually about the way that we treat those verses. Like you were referring to what happens in Genesis with the with Sodom and Gomorrah, and the way that we're trying to interpret all this. It's very mysterious, you know. I mean, it is very much open to interpretation. So I kind of get a little perturbed sometimes when people jump the gun and just say this is what this is, because we don't completely know. You know?
Yeah, for sure. There's so much hypothesis, and this is another level at which I think, David, ecumenism is important. Like there is a fundamental level at which the world. Well, I'm going to tell you what I believe. I think we do have primordial revelations, but I think they're broken, and so I think you have fragmented revelation all over the place. And I think an epistemological necessity is the humility to say, here are the fragments that I think I have, and I want more fragments. Right? I want to try to find my way to the whole. That's difficult.
I think the later school of the other school of Kabbalah, that's not the Genesis school, but the Ezekiel school, that would tend to agree with you into how you use specifically the word fragment. If you're relating to the broken vessels and trying to, our task to bring all those pieces together, I think it kind of speaks to that. Revelation itself, it's not like prophecy is not the same as prediction. Yeah, and that's a common misconception is people are like, oh, they prophecy this. And it's like prophecy actually relates that one is actually getting such a profound insight into the mechanism and the dynamics of that mechanism that repeat. And so, yeah, for all intents and purposes, this could translate to a prediction, but really the thing in itself that's happening is right now you see it all in this moment. It's just this is the way things are. So
and the root of prophecy, like the story of Micaiah ben Imlah, tells us that it's not necessarily the future, it's the participation in the divine sod that that results in you being a messenger,
right, which remains a mystery. That's the thing. Yes. It's like I think we have this idea that there's like you solve a mystery. But like in Jewish mysticism, it's like you get a sense of the mystery, and there's just more mystery. Like it keeps coming. It's just like that's not like you've reached some plateau and now you necessarily get it. You know what I mean? Like that's why there's such a emphasis on the humility. And there's kind of warning around like jumping the gun. Like there's this idea of reserving one's awe. That people will reach something is so beyond anything you've experienced before that you're in awe, and like they're like even still don't settle for that. This is the thing. You
never want to be awful. You always want to be awesome, dude.
that's a bumper sticker or a tombstone right there. One of the two. That's awesome. Hey, Andreas, you want to grab Deuteronomy 32 for us? Chaz and I got to talk about this verse. This is good stuff. By good stuff, what I mean here is, once again, as happens so often, the King James translators show that they don't know what they're talking about. Okay? So 32 verse 17. Let's look at it in the English, and then I'm going to show us the Hebrew, and we'll talk through it.
Good idea.
So this is the authors of Deuteronomy, okay, talking about what your ancestors did. So in the in the narrative, if you read it naively, you would think, okay, this is Moses talking about what your ancestors did in Israel. But a historical reading, historians, critical Bible scholars would say, no, this dates to the end of the kingdom of Judah. And it's really talking about what the Judahites and the Israelites did up until we, the righteous Deuteronomists, came along. Okay, so let's read verse 17, and then we're going to Hebrew it. They actually, in fact, really, it's only the first little bit I care about. Read the whole thing though. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God. This certainly sounds very bad. To gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. So this is grandma and grandpa. Grandma and grandpa made terrible mistakes. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God. Okay. Now,
it was the 60s.
It was, there's a lot of drugs, man. There was a lot of drugs. So let's. I'm gonna look at the Hebrew here, or you can pull it up. Will that work?
That might be.
You know what? I only need the first 4 words. So look at verse 17. Pull up the first 4 words.
Is it Deuteronomy 32:17? Do the right thing here.
Could be it. Yeah.
Okay. Your fathers.
You're at the bottom. Go up to the top.
Sorry, I was trying to go backwards. I hate doing that.
You're going up from the bottom up. That's it. That's all we need. Okay. This is the first clause. This is the first little bit. Okay. So they sacrificed to demons, not to God. Now let's start with that name for God. Okay. That's a strange name for God. It's not unique, but it's unusual. Mm-hmm. Now, first of all, if you look at it, and again, if you take away, if you want to go back and show the Hebrew words there, if you take away the point, okay, so you have 3 letters there: Aleph on the right, Lamed in the middle, Hey on the left. Without the pointing, the natural reading for this is not Eloah, but Elah. Now, words that end in a feminine. Now, again, there are a lot of people who will say, no, it doesn't mean this for reason X, for reason Y. But a naive reading of that, El is a masculine and it means God, and a Hey on the end looks like it means goddess. And in fact, in Ugarit, which is Israel's nearest neighbor in time and space, it's a couple of centuries before Israel and a little bit up the coast, Elot was the name of their great goddess. That's just the feminine form of El. This looks like the feminine form of El, except that people later came in and put a lot of points to say, no, it's not Elah, it's Eloah, Eloha. Okay? But let's consider the possibility that actually it was Elah. In other words, that the verse says, your ancestors, they sacrificed to devils, not to a goddess. Mm-hmm. Now, Chaz.
Yes.
If Deuteronomy is telling people this, what must those ancestors have thought?
That there was a goddess.
They must have thought that they were sacrificing to a goddess, right? You're reproving people for a sin, like the sin is they were sacrificing to a goddess, and the Deuteronomists here are saying they know they were sacrificing to devils, not to a goddess like they thought. Now, good, very good, well done. So let's go back to the beginning of the sentence. The first word is yizbahu, which is just they sacrificed. That's pretty straightforward. Lashadim. The 3 letters in the middle of that, okay, are Shin, Dalet, Yod. That's the same 3 letters that spell out Shaddai. That's Shaddai right there.
Mm-hmm. I've seen this pointed out, yeah. And you have shade. So shade is related to in demonology, for lack of a better word.
Well, that's exactly right. So this is clear wordplay, right? Because if we've been thinking, all right, so Shaddai is the breasted god, Shaddai is the fruitful god, the Shaddai commands the Hayot. This sounds like a goddess,
right? But it's determined by our merits. It's determined by us what that is. Like, so it's in our relationship to it. So our folly ends up changing the meaning.
So the Deuteronomist claim, right, So again,
Yeah, perfect point.
what makes this make sense? Well, this sentence makes the best sense if grandma and grandpa not only thought they were sacrificing to a goddess, they thought her name was Shaddai. Because then the Deuteronomists are saying, no. They were Yizbahula Shadim. They were sacrificing to demons.
Right. Well, we sacrifice to both. Like if you're doing, if we talk about this quite a bit on Think Tank, but if you're looking at like the scapegoat ritual, as it's described, you have two goats. One is to Hashem, and one is to the Sitra Akra. And so the one that you release into the wilderness is actually being thrown to the klipot, whereas the one that you actually physically murder, that's the one that's to Hashem. And so there's a duplicity there, and you see that. You're making a fantastic point, because the nature of Shaddai is determined by us. So like that's the thing, is that there's a challenge that's put forward to the Jewish people to what it is that you're doing, like where not just what you're doing, but like how you're relating to it determines the expression and the repercussions, whether you're going to get sweet judgments or bitter judgments. Like Gevurah isn't bad, Gevurah isn't evil, Gevurah is just judgment. And depending on what our orientation is, will determine what comes our way in response to that.
Cleave.
Yeah.
So Dave, would you say that the grandma and grandpa before the Deuteronomist, how did they relate, or what does the evidence point to how they related to the divine spouses? Was it more of a physical nature where they had a body, or was it like was being described before? It's all metaphorical, bearded hairs and all that other stuff.
Well, the archaeological evidence that the kingdom of Judah, by and large, first of all, it's clear from the text that the kingdom of Judah knew a goddess, because if they didn't, you wouldn't have the Deuteronomists bitching about it, right? Them saying, don't do this is a clear indication people are doing it. So you can choose who you think is right or wrong in that discussion, right? But like clearly they were. But whatever debate there used to be on that is basically at this point over. We found thousands of the Judean pillar figurines. We found writings from sort of Isaiah's time to the end of the monarchy, which are in tombs or other settings that refer to Yahweh and his Asherah. Like, it is clear that a lot of people, a lot of citizens of the kingdom of Judah and Israel thought that God, there was a male God and there was a female God, at least that many, right? So what exactly they did is an interesting question. There's the passages in Jeremiah about baking cakes for the Queen of Heaven and offerings for the Queen of Heaven, right? That may relate to that worship.
Talk about a poor translation when you're looking at Bereshit and it says, male and female created he them. That doesn't make any sense. Like, that's not, like, you're describing that Hashem is both at the same time, and they're one thing, right? So you don't have a split when the Adam is first created. Like, and then that split is still showing you like the split that happens after that, because it's almost like Adam and Eve are created twice in a sense, because you know what I mean? Because
then it's just Adam asleep in the dust and they pull a rib out.
Right. And it's also related to the two lights, because in the beginning you have the lights created and then you have the sun. And so like and so that's the issue with sun worship isn't that this is wrong for the reason that like the law is such, not because of a law like I like to say like a stop sign. It's more of a law like gravity. It's because it's this is the way it is. So you're falling short by worshiping the sun. It's like I was saying before about like reserving one's awe. It's like if the sun is so bright and it's the source of all the sustenance, but they were recognizing that there's a light beyond this, that this is still an emanation from something that's even more etheric.
Yeah.
So from the Mormon point of view, like a lot of the early apostles and everything, they would teach that. So there was a possibility to see the Most High God, or Elyon, in a physical or a localized manifestation. And they would say that he once possessed a tabernacle and ascended to his position of authority and power and glory. And it's not necessarily the tabernacle itself that we're worshiping, but the light that dwells in the tabernacle. It's the way, it's an embodiment of the self-existent truth that has always permeated all realities? Would you have it? That's kind of like a yoga perspective, like with the guru. It's like it's not the visage of the person, it's that which dwells within the temple that's being presented.
Oh, absolutely. That's neti in that tradition. So you'd say not this, because you're not going to like settle for this thing to be the source. You know, the source can't stand out in form. For it to stand out in form means that it's not the source. Like, so as you're moving along, even if it's made by the hands or by the mind, it's still not that. And so that's the thing with the Holy of Holies and the, you know, within the tabernacle, you know, you have something that's so transcendent of anything we could ever conceive of, because once there's a conception, now you're removed from it, you know, in a sense.
So I'm going to keep doggedly pushing my thread till I get the end of it. I'm a
fan. We talked about Asherah, and like that excites me because it's a major point that there are goddesses, statues of the goddess that we're finding, and the idea that Abraham smashed all the statues, and then now we're looking at, you know, later even this idea that they're told that they're smashing, like they're destroying their demons, right? Because it's the goddess. I mean, it seems like it could be. I could see how this could happen historically.
Yeah. So, so the name Shaddai appears 48 times, I think, in the Hebrew Bible. The distribution is not even. It does not appear in the book of Deuteronomy, for example. So, which tends to confirm that they were not a fan. I'm going to point you at least 2 Book of Mormon passages. Okay. I am David, I'm a Book of Mormon guy. So, First Nephi 1, actually, Andreas. So, the Book of Mormon opens up strikingly with a vision of the throne of God, which we Mormons tend not to know what to do with. So I think I don't have the verses. I think I wanted like verse 8 to 9 or something. That's it. Exactly right. 8 to 9. And then we're going to jump down to verse 14 in a minute here. So, so this is Lehi's first vision is a fire dwelling on a rock. He then has immediately a second vision, which I think is the same vision articulated differently, which is the throne of God. But it's not just the throne. And being thus overcome with the Spirit, Lehi was carried away in a vision, even that he saw the heavens open, and he thought he saw God sitting upon his throne. Now, if we're trying to sort of reverse engineer what underlying Hebrew might be, by default, if we see God, it's probably and we think that the Book of Mormon tends to follow the King James translation, which is the only good thing about the King James translation. He saw God is probably Elohim, maybe it's El. Okay, he thought he saw God sitting upon his throne, surrounded with numberless concourses of angels, in the attitude of singing and praising their God. And it came to pass that he saw one descending out of the midst of heaven, and he beheld that his luster was above that of the sun at noonday, and the one is descending with 12 others. Okay, this is the heart of the vision. There's some other stuff. He sees God on a throne, and then one descending. Now, this causes him to exclaim. If we go down to, I think, verse 14, it causes him to utter a divine name, which is super interesting. Nope. Yeah, there it is. Perfect. It is verse 14. Great and marvelous are thy works, O Lord God Almighty. Now, this caught my eye this week. Why? Well, first of all, this divine name does not appear in the Old Testament. Lord God Almighty. Because again, if we reverse engineer these translations, Yahweh, Lord could be Adon, or Adonai. Properly, it's probably Yahweh. God is El or Elohim. Almighty, the King James translates Shaddai always is Almighty. This is Yahweh El Shaddai, Yahweh Elohim Shaddai. which does not appear as a name in the Hebrew Bible, right? Super interesting. Now, if we scroll back up, though, to verses 8 and 9, I think what we see is that actually all three members of the divine family are in fact there. Now, David, this is where I reveal that I'm somewhat of a heterodox Mormon. Not everyone would talk about all three members of the divine family the same way. I'm talking about God, the Father, the one descending who is Israel's special angel, Yahweh, and that's it, Andreas, and the throne, right? And the throne, which is to say the tree of life, the throne of God, the mother, the nourishing mother on whose lap the king sits. And we could go look at a bunch of stuff from Horus sitting in the lap of Isis to Michelangelo's Pietà, where Christ is sitting on the lap of Mary, and Mary is really the throne of the glorified Christ, just like Isis is the mother and the living throne of Horus as king, right? So it turns out, I'm just going to summarize. I won't make us go there, but there are. I do want to show one other passage in the Book of Mormon later, but I'm going to summarize three others. So it turns out the name Yahweh, Lord God Almighty, Yahweh Elohim Shaddai, does not show up in the Hebrew Bible, but 4 times in the Book of Mormon. So in 2 Nephi 9 and 2 Nephi 38, 2 Nephi 28, it appears again. And in both contexts, it is clearly judgment before the throne. So in these 3 consecutive appearances of this name, it is the throne, at the throne of God. And in fact, in 2 Nephi 9 seems to have the sinner, and this looks like a ritual. You just search for Almighty, you can find it. I forget the verse. It's somewhere in there. There it is. So the sinner, having been judged, says what to me reads like a ritual declaration. Holy, holy, holy are thy judgments, O Lord God Almighty. The passage in 2 Nephi 28 seems to be the response, because it shows Lord God Almighty saying, woe, 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 and casting that same sinner down to hell. And again, that has to be the judgment at the throne scene. So that's a surprisingly consistent. This looks like a name that seems to recall Father, Mother, Son. That's a name used at the divine throne. So a temple, a holy of holies, specifically a name in connection with the judgment. There's and then there's one other chapter where it appears, which is also an intensely ritual chapter. It's 3 Nephi 4. In 3 Nephi 4, we see an execution of Zemnariah, who is a criminal. He's a criminal of cosmic scope. And he is executed by being hanged from a tree. The people all, they say declarations together and they sing together. And then the tree is cut down. And then there's this, blessed be the name of the Lord God Almighty, which Yahweh Elohim Shaddai. And again, in this passage, you've got El Elyon invoked as well as Yahweh, and the execution is on a tree. So this was for Chad. It seems he disappeared. He's invisible.
He keeps doing that. I don't know. He's probably fighting.
Is the camera upside down on a carpet or something?
No. I'm just, dude. I've been out working all day. I'm listening. I have my headphones in. I was just getting some Totino's pizza rolls in the microwave. I've been doing that the whole time. I'm starving.
I wasn't trying to tell you.
I'm listening to this.
You're skinny.
I was just about to ask, like, if this is going to follow up with 1 Nephi 11.
I was not. We can go look at it. I do have another comment I want to make about Mosiah 18, which I think is almost more amazing. But
okay, we'll do 1 Nephi 11 after you do that, because I think it does connect with the throne.
Okay, interesting. It's just surprisingly consistent use of this sort of strange name in three judgment throne scenes and one execution, which is a solemn ritual execution, which I take to be basically a sacred occasion. Invocation of this name of the divinity that I think the Deuteronomists hated. So I think that was the original headline, was like, we're going to be talking about Deuteronomists and stuff they didn't like. So that's the end of my thread. I will share another verse later, though.
Throne in Hebrew is kiss.
Kissa,
right?
Kissa, yeah.
So, Dave, you mentioned earlier that Mary can be kind of a symbol of this throne. So whenever people have the accusation that, like, the Catholic Church and with its adoration of Mary is just carrying on like secret Asherah worship, what would you say to that? Is that a good or a bad thing to be accused of? Or
man, it's so okay. I mean, this is kind of what David was talking about earlier from a different perspective, maybe. Which is let me take it this way. So I've talked about breasts, and now I'm going to talk about magic. The word magic, okay, comes from a Greek word which is mageia, and what mageia literally means is the stuff that those fire priests of Iran do, and the Greeks put that label on the religious practices of these foreigners, and then they proceeded to shove anything else they didn't understand into that same bag. And so Mageia came to include the stuff our poor people do, the stuff that those religious weirdos who worship Dionysus do, right? The stuff they do in the other Greek cities. There's a
effective technology.
Yeah, there's a long history of describing the other guy's religion, the other guy's spiritual quest as sorcery. And that doesn't mean that I don't think there might not be sorcery, right? Or people who pervert spiritual paths, or people who do things that are evil, for sure, right? But look, man, women matter. You can't make spirituality all male, and it's a bad idea to try. So if someone has a paradigm that's different from you, but like it seems to be sincere, man, I would try to listen.
I think that's what Kenneth Anger was trying for, was like that his relationship to like the Solar Lodge was one of like, he's like, this is our club. And I don't think he is the first to do that. you know? Yeah. I mean, there's the stone that the builders rejected is that's one of the most important verses in the Tanakh, or is related to, like, from my teachers, they treat it that way. Because the idea of the archway, and that the center stone of that archway is
chapter 118. Sorry,
it relates to your God Almighty thing, because it's the might, it's the strength, it's the integrity of existence. So when you're looking at what makes nature so strong, there's this the most important component. And the argument in that verse, the stone that the builders rejected, is that they took that most sacred thing and they pushed it to the bottom. And so that suppression of the Shekinah is like the real indicator of the fall, and the indicator of the real, what you could call the redemption, the real salvation, is in it being put back in its rightful place. And so I think that there's examples throughout the Tanakh where you see like the fall being perpetuated, and it always kind of has this particular characteristic to it, that they're taking what is most sacred, which is also receptivity, and pushing it down so that they can kind of construct this sustaining order of this kingdom to kind of like stand in its place, but no makeshift nothing that we manufacture can actually withstand that in the long run. It can just temporarily give the appearance, and that really is like kind of the meaning of like what false gods are. Is like the false god is anything thing to stand in the place of this most sacred thing, if that makes sense.
It does. Chaz, look, I do believe. I'm a believer, okay, and I believe in some things literally. And I believe there is a divine family, and I believe that there's a divine woman as there is a divine man, and I think that this is maybe a straighter answer to the question, right? I do think that Mary is a memory of that. I think there's some misunderstanding, but I think the insisting on the perpetual virginity is a memory of something that's not quite what it really meant, right? There was a historical woman. She had children, right? Like I believe we're saying racy stuff today, right? I think she birthed children in the normal way, right? But Alma virgin. Actually, I'm going to come back to this again. I mean, this is a good time. Like it's such a wonderful root. The word, again, wordplay. Things that it means things that are olam. So it's the world, it's eternity, but it's also ta'aluma, which is things that are secret. Also, it appears as elim, meaning wisdom, right? All that root is tied up in, all of those meanings are tied up in the word virgin, which again, here's another King James translator. You guys sucked. Isaiah 7, where the King James translation says, "A virgin shall conceive." It is not a virgin.
No, it's pure. It's pure. She's pure. I mean, I don't know why. I think it's just, is this just preachers from so many generations and so much illiteracy that just became like this, like we just projected that into it, because it doesn't seem to be there. Are we talking about the gospel? Like, are we talking about the Greek communication around the Virgin Mary and like the way that's interpreted?
Can't imagine if the Greeks were too,
but also the English, right? So I mean, the Isaiah emphatically says it's ha-alma. So Isaiah knows a specific, like it is the virgin. It is some being or person, to whom that name applies. The King James translators, I think what they're afraid of is Mary, afraid of Mariolatry, and so they say a virgin, right?
Well, here's something interesting I have on that. So it's a little revelation experience I had. So long story, I kept seeing these synchronicities. I talked about this on another live stream, right? With the symbol of a 5-leaf clover. I keep seeing it everywhere. And then finally, I'm in this field. I figure out what it means. I'm like, okay, God, if that's what it means, show me one right now. And then my buddy's like, hey, look, 10 seconds later, here's a 5-leaf clover here. All the others are 3, right? So I'm having this sort of synchronicity moment. That night I'm in the shower. I'm thinking over the Mary Asherah connections, because it's very clear that there are, if you've read Margaret Barker's The Mother of the Lord, there's very clearly that first temple tradition of Asherah, either being the wife of
Ave Maria being Eve.
Right? Right, because there's 2 things where Yahweh is the husband of Asherah, or he's also the son of Asherah in times, where Elyon is the father of Yahweh, right? And he's sort of like this representative, the first emanation of the source, right? But
which, by the way, I have a question for you about that.
Yeah, but there's very clearly a connection, right? So that Mother of the Lord thing, Queen of Heaven, that same title. So I sort of inquire of that. I'm thinking of it in the showers, and then this thought kind of comes to my mind. Mary is the handmaiden of Asherah, right? And I kind of think about the idea of like a handmaiden bearing the child for her master, right? Who's a woman, right? And then I just Google that term, handmaiden of Asherah, and there's a lesser known goddess that in a way was kind of an emanation of Asherah, a symbol of her called, I believe it was Anath. It was found in the Hebrew pantheon and the Egyptian pantheon, and her title was the Virgin. So that's very interesting.
That does make me want to go look up and see what the King James translates handmaid as, or what word it's translating into handmaid where it appears, because because what some of the terms for priest basically just mean things like servant, and so handmaid has that kind of feel where it might have that
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, because I had in my mind,
There's
in my
also
mind, I
what
was sort of,
Muhammad is related to as a Lilith is related to as the handmaiden.
Oh, that's
But
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that just sort of came to my mind after and I think it was right after I read Margaret Barker's Temple Theology when she's talking about these depictions of Mary being this sort of uh, priestess at the temple, right? This sort of Asherah priestess in a way.
There's also the argument that Gavora kind of plays the role of handmaiden during the interim of the fall, in that as Shekinah is separated from Ze'er, that she kind of like plays this part during this time, and she's kind of put in that position. I always had kind of like conflict around Gavora even being feminine, and Chesed being masculine, but I think I see what it's getting at is just kind of like, just to speak to it simplistically, it's like nature will take and take and take what it is that we give it, and if we misuse, if we mistreat nature, then eventually it has like, it's more of a reflex than it is a punishment. It's like, this is just what it does, you know what I mean? Like, you're gonna end up with earthquakes because you've done what you've done to, you've taken out the oil, and now there's nothing to lubricate the plates, and now this is its response. I always kind of have difficulty with this notion of God's punishment, because the way that we see instances of that being described, it's not like our own. So like, there's also this idea like that you'll see in the Zohar, where it'll communicate, actually this might be Takeni Zohar, but there's this idea that like the punishments, like the death penalty, like the way that we actually like applied the death penalty relate to the four klipot, like each in a specific way, that like, because the klipot are mirroring Tetragrammaton, but they're not actually that you have a kind of a distortion in it. It's like a mirror, but it's like a funhouse mirror. Like, it's like it's not really the thing. And so when we're trying to institute like punishment, we're not going to be like it's like vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Like, we can't actually be that. So, but we do it anyway. And so it's kind of like, so the best that you could hope for is that we get as close as we can to that, but to execute that at all, like, no pun intended, is going to be flawed. It's going to have, you're never going to be able to act in such a way that the intelligence of, I should just say, like, the way that nature responds to us, like, we're not an actual just direct compensation reflex. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, nature it compensates for what it is that's coming at it. We can try and do that, but we can't really do that. Maybe once upon a time we were able to, but we're certainly not there now. And I don't know the last time we've been there.
One thing I just wanted to say, I was thinking earlier, because we talked about how a lot of modern Hebrew is based on Arabic and Phoenician, because we had to recover the idea of Hebrew, even that we should be also looking at the Arabic words, even as much as when we're studying Hebrew, we should be trying to figure out, like, when they're talking about El Shaddin, which is like Allah El Shaddin is like the Hebrew version. I mean, sorry, the Arabic version, but a lot of the rabbis in Spain, right, they were writing in Arabic. So you're going to get a Jewish mystical book that's going to be written completely in Arabic. So ideas also like Allah are interesting, because in Spain, with Spanish having El and Ea, El Allah, you have this idea of like already this dynamic between the feminine and the masculine, which a lot of the Arabic rabbis were writing about, because that was a way to look at it even then. So whether there be a dynamic where everything is somehow a singularity, but also has personifications, it seems like it makes sense that there's fully faceted, focused self in things. The way that your lungs are focused on being lungs, probably the feminine aspect of God is focused on being the feminine aspect of God, just because it makes things work better when things are working together. So
I love that. And I'm not even sure I know what you mean, David. What he said, the Givurah is substituting for the Shekinah until it returns. Did I get to hear that right?
Yeah. So, it's complicated, but there's that pathway between Chesed and Gevurah.
Yeah.
And there's a communication in the Zohar around like the significance and the nature of that pathway. So when we talk about the stone that the builders rejected, because that's the path in like there's Euro occultism, but if you were to apply the tarot arcana to the Kabbalistic tree,
Sure.
then that pathway would correspond to what was in the Rider-Waite and Marseille tarot as strength or force, like la force or strength. For like Crowley, when he called that lust, and he visualized the beast of the apocalypse with the scarlet woman, that he did that for a reason. It was actually like honest. Like I don't see that as in like that he was necessarily like manipulating it. He was actually like for where we're at, how we're relating to this is essentially what it is. So instead of it being strength like Oz, it's a kind of like a idolatrous strength. So it's not real strength, but it's a stand-in. And so until Shekinah is reunited, and so there's this idea, you've probably seen like what is related to as the lightning flash that's described in the Sepher Yetsirah, where the zigzag that moves through the Kabbalistic tree.
Sure.
So that's a very significant pathway in that. Where can you find type in like Kabbalistic tree of life, lightning flash, or tree of
You're fast, Andreas.
Yeah. Are we?
That good?
Yeah. So there we go. Yeah. So like you'll see that like first of all, there's a diagonal where there is no diagonal pathway between the supernal triad and the 7 lower Sephirot, and so we have to pretend that the Gimel, the G, is a diagonal when in fact it is not. And then the next pathway is that horizontal pathway between Chesed and Gevurah. And so there's this communication, this kind of prophetic communication in the Zohar, where they're relating to like the pathway that humanity actually takes for, I would say, insert the idea of like evolution, like evolutionarily, like in order for us to get from Gevurah to Chesed, you basically like the way that it's described is almost like a teeter-totter. Like you have like this plane and then you have a peg, and they communicate that like humanity as we reach like the apex, or like because this is the top of the pillars of the lower worlds, right? So even though those pillars can continue to extend upward, we're relating to like as far as we go in this physical world. We reach this point where we're actually like it's related to like that the left is actually going to conquer the right, and the whole world unconsciously or whatever relates to this movement that we're actually like that the collective left hemisphere is going to conquer the right hemisphere. It's going to defeat it. And so like as we actually extend and move forward, that plane tilts, and as it tilts, as we get to the middle point, it increases, like it becomes like this exponential type movement. And as we actually begin to fully approach Chesed, we think we're going, like our left brain thinks it's going to devour the other side. But as it gets closer to it, it begins to realize that the thing that it thinks it's going to swallow up is actually much larger than itself, because of the principle of emanation. So that because of this lightning flash, we're actually moving from right to left. And as we extend back, we're moving from left to right, and we have this kind of like hubris or arrogance that thinks we're going to defeat the other side, but it's really just one thing, so you can't really defeat it. So there's this idea that we move forward, and this is actually connected to the movement towards a one world government. So like that's how it's externalized in the world, how it's how we're relating to it, how we see it experientially, materialistically. And then like as we approach it, the left actually gets swallowed up by the right. And so because it's larger than it, because it's closer to the source, and then the whole thing kind of like transmutates and pushes out this other reality that we couldn't have conceived of prior. And so that's like the profound mystery of the thing, is like, how do we evolve into something beyond anything that we've known, but it's actually an organic process. And so the communication is that as that's taking place, we're relating to kind of like, like a conceptual world that we're all projecting, and we think that this is the thing on some level because we've compartmentalized it so much, but we're relating to the replication as though it were the thing in itself. So in other words, they predict that we will arrange these different kind of like sacrificial events and all these things around this larger organic event, as though we think we have to do it ourselves, but really the thing is inevitable. So like the best that we could do is just like adapt to what's taking place and just like move along with it. But instead we try to do it ourselves. And in doing that, we kind of veil what's actually happening in the midst. It's hard to communicate this, but
well, it's super interesting because there's like, on the one hand, there's like a neuroscience thing that I think you are maybe deliberately alluding to, left and right brain kind of stuff. This is very much my reaction. Part of my reaction to reading the Sepher Yetsirah, right, is that, look, these exercises. So you're are two hemispheres of the brain. Right. The left hemisphere is really good at focusing on one thing, and in fact, it turns out it's focusing on an artificial construct of that thing. So it's really good at solving a Rubik's cube or doing anything like solving a Rubik's cube. Right. The right brain sees everything all at once. Yeah. Which means the right brain is where identity lives, and it's where meaning lives, because those things are all relationship, right? You can't discuss an identity of Dave if you can't relate me to things, right? Right. Ideas, other people, history, right? And so we have this challenge where. And by the way, I don't know. We talked about that. I write. I'm a sci-fi fantasy novelist. Okay, so like we had this challenge that we sort of go around consciously perceiving the world through this artificial lens that's really good only at specific manipulation, little tasks. Yeah. And so there's a lot of possible things to talk about here. One of my takeaways from the Sepher Yetsirah is it felt like, I never said this, but it felt like that a lot of the point of the exercises was that it was a technique for getting into the right brain and unlocking the sort of the power, which is really where that's sort of our God brain, right? That's where the larger universe is.
It's closer. It's not the source, but it's closer to the source than the left brain is. And that's related to the two pillars of Yakin and Boaz being established in strength, because the in strength of the left pillar is actually pointing back at the right pillar, because that's where it was established. Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that. There's also, you said something that sounds actually very much like a 20th century Mormon commentator named Hugh Nibley, who talked about it, not in terms of the Sephirotic tree or even left or right brain, but he said, and this is sort of Mormon paradigm stuff too. He said, look, the second coming is going to happen. Heavenly Jerusalem is going to descend. You can't make that happen or stop it from happening. All you can do is prepare yourself to survive the culture shock. And that's what your spiritual quest should be. Is preparing ourselves as a community, yourself as a person, for the inevitable encounter with the divine.
Right. And ignorance has an unexpected value. And that's one of the things that I've seen communicated in Zohar. Like you see a lot of communication around sod throughout. Sod. And it's very rare that they speak to actual secrecy. One of the only places that I've seen reference to the need for secrecy was in commentary on the Zohar, relating why not to be in a hurry. If you like in this particular prophecy, there's only one prophecy in the Zohar that I know of, and there's two sections that speak to it, because it's not a prophetic book, right? It's an esoteric book, and it gives you the kind of the communication of what Kabbalah is. But the only place where it starts making real predictions, there's one place where Ramak was communicating the need for secrecy, and he says that there's a reason for our ignorance, like it serves a function in the end. that we would never predict, because it's in our not knowing that when it comes to a point where we're being kind of like forced to be shown, like when it reaches like a breaking point, there's an explosive nature to the big reveal, and that actually contributes to the transmutation.
Yeah, see, like that's one of my worries, of course, because you look at some other people who study the Kabbalah, like, you know, the Wachowski siblings, and you saw how that went. I'm just saying. So you have to be
Right,
very
but the Wachowskis got access, in all likelihood, from what I gather, to one section of the Zohar that actually predicts 9/11. So, but there's two sections, and the first section speaks to it in almost like, if you were to just translate it directly, it feels very much like a fanatical thing, because it's like Israel will act mightily, and there's all of this. But like the second section is much longer and much more depth. It actually speaks to Israel going after another god, and it doesn't speak highly of Israel in the future. And so like and it's strange too, because when they're talking about Israel, what are they talking about? Like, they're not talking about, like, how would they know, like the way that Israel would become more and more like the rest of the nations around the world. So that's like, there's this integrity that existed with what Israel was, like, culturally, that it's you know, it doesn't look the same now. So it's like, but the Wachowskis, I mean, I think with the passport, when they put the 9/11 on the September 11th as his expiration date,
Oh, that's
like,
right.
I think that it gives the exact date. And so, and then there was a correction that was made in the 18th century by a rabbi, where he's very specific to like why they know that the date
you
that
pulled
was
it
given.
so hard together. I can't believe you did that. Okay, Matrix passport. What day is his passport expire? September 2001. Nice work.
September 11th, 2001.
September 11th, 2001.
Yeah,
That's pretty good. Sorry,
it's true.
that was good. I liked it. Keep going.
Yeah, no, and then the red and the blue pill with Joaquin and Boaz, like it all feels so direct. But I don't think that they were probably exposed to the more extensive part of the Zohar that spoke to it. It's really it's a very small section, and it gives the date. And but yeah, I could see them.
I guess my point was
encoding it
just
in
the
film.
femininity, because we're looking at femininity, and you can see how some people that get obsessed with the goddess get obsessed with like Discordia. You know, we've seen a lot of this in like pop culture and our secular friends in California and New York. So it's not necessary that it's a good thing to be aware of the divine feminine. It could be a great thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. The other thing is that a lot of people don't think it's a good thing. The Deuteronomists and all these people are trying to suppress the femininity. You're saying it's because there's a zigzag pattern that we have to go through culturally. But I'm just wondering, where is the place then? What do you guys think altogether? Where is the place for femininity?
Well, let me show you a surprising place. Let's look at Mosiah 18.
Oh, okay, yeah, I got that open. So cool.
Okay, let's go to Mosiah 18. Chad, this is for you. I saw this like yesterday. Sort of blew my mind. Okay, this is the beginning of the Almaite Renaissance, the religious movement, right? So Alma's been a priest. He's been a priest of a wicked king. A righteous prophet has come and called everyone to repentance, for which they burned him to death. Alma flees into the wilderness. Sort of the movement he founds sort of carries on and becomes the religious movement of the Nephites. Okay, King Benjamin sort of puts him in charge, makes him official. His name may mean virgin. It may have all of those echoes, eternity, purity, secrecy, wisdom, all of that stuff. But let's go look at verse 4, I think it is, or maybe it's 3 and 4, the description of the waters of Mormon. Okay. Verse 4 and 5. So I saw this while I was looking. I'll show you in a minute why. While I was trying to kind of run down these references to Shaddai, right? So verse 4, it came to pass that as many as did believe him did go forth to a place which was called Mormon, having received its name from the king, being in the borders of the land, having been infested by times or at seasons by wild beasts, by Hayot. Remember, Shaddai has the Hayot. Eve is the mother of every high. Now, there was in Mormon a fountain of pure water, beside which, right, Alma resorted thither, there being near the water a thicket of small trees, which is to say, a grove, right? And now we're looking at 1 Nephi 11:25, where the water and the tree of life are the same thing. And here they are again together, and they're with the living beings. And we have a priest whose name, or maybe it's his title, seems to be the Virgin. Now, Alma baptizes Helam. I think this is in verse 8 or something. It's a few verses down. Maybe it's 13. It's in 13. Okay. What authority is it by which Alma baptizes Helam? This is the beginning of the whole thing. Okay. He says, and by the way, Mormons are, we would expect him to be like, oh, having been commissioned of Jesus Christ, right? We want everyone to do the thing we did. That's not what he says at all. It says, Helam, I baptize thee having authority from Almighty God, which is Shaddai.
This feels Masonic. Excuse my ignorance, but was Joseph Smith a Mason?
Not at this time.
He became one eventually, but not when this was.
But there is a look. There is a. In fact, I have just written a book, David, which is the Book of Mormon has a lot of underappreciated liturgical stuff going on in it.
More isn't like more in Hebrew, like from pomegranate, right? And so there's something interesting with that.
That's interesting. I don't know the answer to that.
So can we cover?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know.
Can we cover Nephi 11 after this? Verse Nephi 11, because that sort of
okay, but first,
the divine feminine thing.
Admit though, isn't that amazing? Frickin' Alma at the waters of Mormon, and there's like the waters, and there's the tree, and there's the beast, and he doesn't baptize by the authority of Jesus. He baptizes by the authority of Shaddai.
Well, they're speaking to the Shefa, it seems, the emanated flow itself, because it's like it's more than an allegory. It's the living waters, right? So it's like that's interesting.
And there's a quote from Joseph Smith where he says, "Water tastes best right from the fountain," and so kind of saying going directly to the source there. So that's kind of an interesting connection, also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is some concordance with more and myrrh and with from pomegranate. I like myrrh just as much, to be honest. I think that's pretty cool. So, I mean, there could be a lot of things to connect even just that. But the idea of there being this baptism under the Almighty and Shaddai, what do you think about Shaddai then? Like, is Shaddai kind of this like, because I think I'm supposed to be afraid of Shaddai, right? Like when people say God-fearing.
No, fear, it means that there's something greater than what you conceive of as yourself. I mean, there's yourself and then there's that, So it's like fear is an interesting word, the way that we translate that, because it means that you recognize how small you are in relationship to the vastness of this thing.
Some Shiva stuff, right? Shaddai is kind of like Shiva then, in a sense.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that Shaddai is actually written on every mezuzah in the scroll that you put, tilted on your door, like that's at the front of it. It's also in the front of the tefillin scroll that's inside the cube. So there's the prayer in the inside that scroll, just like there is in the mezuzah, but it's written there. So
isn't the mezuzah sort of a reference to when the angel of death came over Israel during the Passover, and that's sort of reference to like
totally. Well, that's an application to it, but so is the first letter of Bereshit with the bait. That's why it's discussed like why it is that the Torah doesn't begin with an aleph, but it begins with a bait, which is the house. And so you put it on the front of your house. You put it in front of your living space as a kind of seal. And so, it's superstitiously you could relate it to like this idea of like that it's protecting it, but it's much deeper than that. It's a recognition that like your body is a house and now you're in another house. You know what I mean? Like it's a house within a house,
It's like a butter warmer in a refrigerator.
Yeah. And then the hay is the window and the dalet is the door. And it's like these are aspects of the form, And you're talking about like wordplay. I mean, you'll see that throughout the Tanakh, like these kind of like these really deep meanings that are actually they're simple in nature, but they carry with them quite a bit of depth. So, yeah.
You should show us First Nephi 11, Chad, so we don't miss it. What do you want? What do you want us to see there?
Well, I mean, you're more of the expert, but like the Asherah pun and the Tree of Life.
Oh, yeah.
So in this passage, Nephi sees the same vision that Lehi first saw. He asks the Lord to show him the vision, An angel comes, the Spirit of the Lord comes, shows him this vision, right? And so, like he said before, that second vision he has is also sort of a temple sort of liturgy where it shows the throne of God, except for it's kind of different. There's the tree of life, which, is wisdom, the tree of life. She is the tree of life. It's Asherah, right? But I think you can explain it a lot better.
So, yeah. So I guess this is we're talking about sort of feminine things not everyone who edited the Bible, the Hebrew Bible as we have it, liked, and so sort of became discreet or written out in some cases. Yeah. In First Nephi 8, Lehi sees the tree, which is later described as the tree of life. And I want to say it's verse 10 maybe or 11, and he says it's the fruit was desirable to make one happy. Actually, maybe it's worth rewinding. So Proverbs 3:13-18 is a passage about about wisdom, and describes wisdom as a tree of life. And I'm pulling it up here so I make sure I don't say anything out of school here. Happy is the man who finds wisdom is how it starts in verse 13. And why wisdom is a path to the tree of life. There is verse 18. She is the tree of life to those who lay on her. Happy is everyone that holdest her fast. So Methodist scholar Margaret Barker has commented on Proverbs 3 and said this is the only passage that remains in the Bible that explicitly connects the name Asherah, which is at this point scholarly consensus is that was the name of a popular divine figure in the kingdom of Judah, with the tree of life, which we know from iconography is sort of her great symbol. This is the one passage where that remains.
So this is Yitzhak in Hebrew. Can we look at the Hebrew of what we're looking at in Proverbs?
I'm looking at it Mechon Mamre, so I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's Yitzhak, if it's showing up the same way that it does in Bereshit.
Oh, you mean the tree of life?
Yeah, the tree of life.
Yeah. Sorry.
But I was also wondering if wisdom was Chokhmah.
It says Etz Chaim. Sorry, what's the other question?
Whether or not wisdom is in that verse above it, if we were looking at because Andreas has said Chokhmah. Okay, yeah.
It is. So it's the beatitude formula. So here's the pun: Ashrei Adam, right? Oh, the happiness of the Adam. Matzah Chokhmah. That's how it begins, verse 13.
I see. Yeah.
And then in verse 18, as Etz Chaim he. And then actually verse 19 says the Lord b'chokmah yesad aretz, right? Created the world.
By wisdom, by chokmah.
Yeah. So I think the thing Chad was pointing out is it's really interesting, right? So if we posit that Margaret is right and that, okay, to some Israelites at least, they knew a goddess. They knew her by the name Asherah. And actually, I think the Asherah pun appears twice. It's also in verse. It's also in verse 19. Who holds her fast is Meushar, right? So it's happy. So Asherah.
There's Yesod right there too.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yesad Haaretz. Yeah. So
and it's right next to Chokhmah. Yeah. So
it's got some Sephirotic.
By wisdom, yes. By Chokhmah Yesod.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think the thing that Chad was pointing out is strikingly, the Book of Mormon twice in the first book has a pun where the tree of life is placed apparently right next to the name happy, right next to the word happy, right? Which presumably is Meushar or some use of the same triliteral root. So First Nephi 8, verse 10, right? It was 10, yeah. Lehi encounters the tree. I beheld a tree whose fruit was desirable to make one happy, and then he sees that's the first thing he sees. It's desirable to make it happy. Then he sees that it's white. You eat the fruit and you get joy. Later, we're told it's specifically that it's the tree of life, right? But that connection between this tree and the root Aleph Shin Resh, presumably. First Nephi 11, again, the reason it's sort of striking is that the pun seems to be repeated when his son has his own vision in First Nephi 11. So the son's vision is, I want to see what dad saw, and the spirit guide directs him to, the angelic guide directs him to the tree, and he says, and what is it in verse 11? No, where does oh no, it's in verse 6. So okay, so Nephi says,
First Nephi 11:6.
Yeah, he says, I want to see what my father saw. The Spirit says to you, and this is the Spirit of the Lord. Do you believe that your father saw the tree?
Oh,
and he says, I believe everything my father said. And you get this, blessed art thou, Nephi, and that's the beatitude formula, or potentially it's the beatitude formula. It's the same thing that's in Proverbs 3, Ashrecha. And then Nephi gets his vision of the tree. So we have these back-to-back appearances of the tree, and you have to reverse translate because we have just the English text. But like in both cases, the word happy appears, suggesting that, as in Proverbs 3, the tree is connected with the root Aleph Shin Resh. So, yeah, I think that was the point. Yeah, Chad?
Yeah. And then further, so it goes on to the tree, and Nephi asks, well, what's the meaning of the tree? I don't remember what verse this is, if we could scroll down. So he's like, what is the meaning of this tree? And he's immediately shown a vision of a virgin giving birth to a child, giving birth to Christ, right? And then he is told, and I quote, so in the earlier version, it says the mother of God, because it's referring to Christ as Jehovah and God the Father as El Elyon.
Right? I don't remember if we have the name Christ in this chapter, or if it's the Lord, but yeah.
Yeah, so that is the mother of God, or the Son of God, after the manner of the flesh. And then the angel basically says, now do you know the meaning of that tree? So the fact that it specifies the mother of the Son of God after the manner of the flesh, when he asks, what's the meaning of the tree, and is shown that woman, implies that the tree is the mother of the Son of God after the manner of the Spirit, one might say.
Yeah.
Oh, are we saying, is this about Ein Sof? Because Ein Sof is obviously like it's the feminine, it's the space in which the whole thing is taking place. So when we're relating to the Kabbalistic tree, we see, male and female as Tetragrammaton, but the space that encompasses the whole thing, like what is the essence of the room that we're in? It's space, the walls, the ceiling, the furniture, everything makes up the boundary of the room, but the room itself is space. That's like Ein Sof, or Ein Sof or. So yeah.
And it's interesting. So actually, I'd be curious your take on this. I understand that one of the interpretations of the name Shaddai that is rabbinical. I don't know anything more than that it is rabbinical, so I don't know whose interpretation this is. Maybe it's not in fact rabbinical. Is that it means Shaddai, right? Meaning the one who is the relative pronoun, right? Dai sufficient, which to me, I don't know if that's the right language to talk about the Ein Sof, but it feels to me like you're philosophically in a very similar space, right? You're talking about like that which precedes everything, that which needs nothing else, that which is from which all else emanates, right?
Right. you'll see, like, if you look at the gospel, when it's describing what love is, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not self-seeking. That is actually like us reflecting in the world what Ein Sof ultimately is, saying that the universe is born out of love.
Yeah, creation and destruction exist within the Ein Sof or En Sof, and like the no end kind of thing. Also, ends do happen, but they continue to exist within the eternal. So it's also really similar to like the Vedic understanding of the Narayana, which I like, because then you have an Abrahamic tie to Dharmic traditions, right?
Well, this is also 1 Nephi 11:25, right? Because later in that same chapter, the angel's explanation of Nephi of what is the tree, and he says, I'm skipping to sort of the middle, halfway down, the word of God which led to the fountain of living waters, or the tree of life. The waters are a representation of the love of God. So is the tree, right? So just this idea that the universe's love, we're born out of Ein Sof, that is the love of God.
Right, because even the klipot are of Ein Sof, though they're not of Keter. So like the shefa, the emanated flow that extends through that lightning flash of creation, right? So that is of Ein Sof, but the Sitra Akra, the outside ones, the klipot, those are also of Ein Sof.
Yeah.
So they're not extending through the shefa; they're actually like infiltrating around the shefa, like a what are they related to? Like a wine funnel that gets tighter and tighter as we move through time until the levee breaks. But they're still of Ein Sof, because everything is of Ein Sof.
Yeah.
David, I got a quick question for you. So, what is the nexus point that happens with like Enoch whenever he says he was translated and he was no more? Is that hitting a critical mass point with Ein Sof, where you're so united with Ein Sof, or?
Yeah, good question, because that's like the first transfiguration that we see existing in the Bible, and it actually seems to be relatable to what happened with Jesus at the Mount
the Mount of Transfiguration.
Right, where he has that vision and everything. But yeah, was he dissolved into that? Kind of like what I was saying at the beginning of this conversation about if you actually pronounce the name, if one was to truly be able to pronounce that name, like what would it's like Enoch is like the closest communication that we can find of like that being spoken to, I guess, and then that's parallel with like Babel wanted to make a name for themselves, and the way we treat that is like fame. Like Lady Gaga played on that with the Fame Monster. That was what that was about. So she was like, like, it's silly, but it's true. Like that was like, that's the thing. Gaga, where Gaga came from, it was like her producers, like they named it after Radio Gaga from Queen. And if you watch the music video for that, it's all footage from Metropolis, which is about Babel. And so there's like
Magog, right? Yeah.
Right. So, and it's
Moloch.
actually shortly after that in Bereshit, where you go from they wanted to make a name for themselves, Shem. Like Zechariah Sitchin will tell you that means spaceship. I don't know how he got that, but made a spaceship out of brick and mortar. But anyway, that they wanted to make a name for themselves. And you have the first reference to like the earliest Kabbalists, not too many verses followed from that, where it's basically speaking to the name as Tetragrammaton. And so did they want to make a Tetragrammaton for themselves, or what was it? But I mean, the point is language. The tower is just language. Like I don't think it's all allegory. It's not relating to a physical tower as such. It's saying that language itself, you see this with the Babylonian squares, and that's a whole other tangent thing to get into. But like it's this idea that what language was at a certain point in time was something that was so profound, because it was our relationship to mathematics, not in a conceptual way, but in an extremely direct way, like experiential way. And that through time, it's like we've just lost more and more touch with that, because we compartmentalize further and further, we fragment further and further. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question or what.
Well,
but
I'll tell you what, Joseph Smith allegedly had this number talisman in his pocket. So it's been 2 hours, but after some closings from Dave Butler, I'll tell you, we're definitely going to have to come back and talk about magic, geometric, Solomonic number squares and how they relate to Mormonism. Are you kidding me? I'm 100% down.
Yeah. One thing I'd say to sort of summarize those Asherah thoughts, and why it's so prevalent, the Book of Mormon, is because like with Dave's new book, understanding the Book of Mormon is understanding that first temple period, because we have this book where these guys are saying, hey, the leaders at Jerusalem, they're trying to kill me and my family, and they're doing all these things that were banned at that time period by the Deuteronomists. And, they're having visions of Shaddai, Elohim, Yahweh, right? All the things that they were against. So what we seem to have going on is a parallel narrative written by the people that were sort of excluded. And we do see some similar things going on with like the Dead Sea Scrolls talking about things that were sort of banned during that time period, and other groups as well.
Dave, I have a quick question for you. So, do you know much about the history with the Book of Mormon? So it's supposedly to be of the convincing of the Jew and Gentiles that Jesus is the Christ. How come there isn't a biblical Hebrew translation of the Book of Mormon out there yet?
You mean, why does the church not publish it into Hebrew?
Right. Specifically biblical Hebrew, right?
Politics. There's an agreement that they won't do it because of the Jerusalem Center. So I believe that is explicitly part of the deal. They let they let the church, BYU, build a center on Mount Scopus, and a lot of students over the years have gone and had, I think, lovely experiences. And part of the deal was, you guys will not proselytize in Israel, and you will not publish a Hebrew translation. I think there are a couple of Hebrew translations in the works. There was a Hebrew translation at one point. I know you can find them, but like in the used, probably rare book market. I think Denver Snuffers people are doing a Hebrew translation now.
They should do it in Greek. They won't have to come across the same politics.
Dude, do it in Arabic.
Want to know what I think? I think the purpose of the Book of Mormon is the Deuteronomistic reforms, sort of a return to that religion of the patriarchs, right? Of those divine emanations, one greater than the next, the sons of God, plural, right? And that, a lot of, like we see with the Gnostic Christians and stuff, they have some of those same ideas that then sort of fizzled out with modern Christianity, so it's not exactly the same as at the origins. But that for that gathering of Israel, it's sort of to help to understand that, original religion, that restoration of all things with Messiah ben Joseph and all that stuff.
It is an interesting combination of stuff that looks pre-Deuteronomistic, it looks Abrahamic, but also stuff that seems to be deliberately and deeply symbolic. And it's curious how often key numbers recur, the number 22 or the number 24,
what do you mean by that? You mean in Gematria, or what do you
in
mean
the Book of Mormon?
I mean, but how did the number? Oh, just it says this many things, or just uses
there are this many, and you kind of look at it and go, is it really that many things, or is there something else going on in the text here?
I see.
I think we just are beginning to scratch the surface. I think we have this thing that we don't understand yet. So these are great conversations like this, because this is how we're gonna understand more things over time.
Well, I want everybody to go check out DJ Butler's website. Go to davejohnbutler.com, and he's got all sorts of books for kids and for adults. Check this out. There's an adventure stories for kids section too. You could help your kids with their imagination, get them ready for the world, But also, which one's the ones about crabs? Although, which one would you recommend? That's a better question.
What about crabs?
I got excited. Space crabs.
Abbott in Darkness is a science fiction novel with a sentient race of radially symmetric three-sided crabs.
That seems really important. I'll just have to keep that.
It probably is really important.
You know what I mean?
The synchronicity that I dialed in, you guys were talking about crabs. That's probably
something to it. I'm just saying, everybody go to davejohnbutler.com, and you can pick out his books.
Awesome.
And also check out MK Ultrasound. You can always check out his synchronicity works. He does synchronicity on Twitter. I will be very careful because this is a Mormon podcast, so I can't scroll down. But some of these are great. There's just some of these are Rosemary's Baby, you know, but they're also synced with like the White Album, and there's really important reasons to it. I really love it.
There's the website too. So the syncbook.com. If you you go here to how do we get there again? Your videos, and then you see sync flicks, and yeah. So I have like over 200. If you've ever heard of playing Dark Side of the Moon with the Wizard of Oz, I'm the world's leading pioneer in album film pairing. So I've been doing this for 25 plus years. So yeah.
That is cool.
There's a lot of really crazy movies which I'm pretty sure they really wanted a certain soundtrack with and couldn't do for legal reasons, and for some reason just syncs 3 times perfectly. I mean, you'd be surprised how many there are. There are a lot. It's pretty impressive, I gotta admit. All right, I love you all. Take care. Latter-day Chad. See you soon. Chaz,
Thank
Dave
you.
Butler. Next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for
That was
being
fun.
here. I'll see you soon.
Thanks.